Well, good afternoon, and thank you for joining us on what looks like a glorious day, but I promise you it is for good reason. So welcome to the Cambridge and Peterborough Combined Authority Pavilion this afternoon. My name is Charlotte Horobin, and it's my privilege to be the Chief Executive of the Cambridgeshire Chambers of Commerce, which in turn means I work extremely closely with the Combined Authority, but all of our partners that you've got the benefit of hearing from today. We will be exploring how we are building an advanced manufacturing and materials powerhouse from our region, but also the really incredible role that logistics plays and wider supporting infrastructure. So to begin with, we'll hear from our esteemed panelists just for a couple of minutes so that they can give you their own very short perception of where the sector strengths are, the opportunities that lie ahead. But then I'm really keen to turn to you, our audience, as soon as we possibly can, so that if you've got questions, answers, things that you would like to hear from our panellists today, we don't miss the opportunity for you to be able to do so. So to begin with, it's my pleasure to firstly introduce Katy Davies. So Katy is the Managing Director of UKREiiF Systems. But Katy, can I hand over to you really to help our audience understand what is that secret powerhouse that we absolutely need to shout about more across Cambridgeshire and Peterborough's manufacturing sector?
Yeah, thank you very much. Of course. So my name is Katy Davies, as Charlotte kindly said. I am Managing Director of UKREiiF Systems, an SME manufacturer based in St Ives, Cambridgeshire. We manufacture PCBs, so electronic circuit boards, cables, wiring harnesses, and all of that kind of good stuff. Why is manufacturing important to me, and why is it important to the region? I think UKREiiF is incredibly typical of a manufacturer in this ecosystem. We're talking about building an advanced manufacturing and materials powerhouse in the region. It's a really complex supply chain, and it needs all of those elements, a bit like a manufacturing operation, to come together to be able to deliver for our customers and to provide employment and to contribute the incredible amount of GVA that the sector can do in our region. So I think it's an absolute privilege to be on the panel this afternoon and to be knitting together these really complex elements of what is such an enormous ecosystem already in the region and has so much more potential to give.
Katy, thank you. So our next panellist is Tim Holmes, who is a Director at Endurance Estates. So Tim, pleasure to have you here today.
Yeah, thank you. I'm Tim Holmes. I'm a chartered surveyor. I've been working in Cambridgeshire since 1990, delivering business parks and Ives Business Park sourced and various others, and we're bringing forward the Brampton Cross proposed employment park in Huntingdon and various other employment schemes. So my take on this is that Cambridge is not just about life sciences and labs and silicon chip offices. It's very much about advanced manufacturing, and there's three components of that. Firstly, we've got, in Huntingdonshire, a massive composites base that is often overlooked. With a company like ACE, we've seen graphene companies such as Paragraph. There's a real depth of companies doing sort of light manufacturing in those sectors. Secondly, we have the life sciences support. Companies like CMR Surgical have gone to Ely. All the TTP and PA and those guys in Melbourne are really playing a major role. And thirdly, clean energy. We recently supported Huntingdonshire in a symposium about clean energy. And that depth of that clean energy sector, whether it's about EV, whether it's about heavy goods in Perkins, it's also about defence. So there's a whole range of sectors. But of course, all of that needs supply chain. And we're well positioned in Hunts. Being in a geography which is, you can see on the map behind me, is incredibly good. You've got the East Coast ports an hour and a half away. You've got, if you talk about defence, you've got Stevenage 20 minutes away, Stansted. So we're at a great crossroads, and let's make the most of that 1.5 billion the government's spent on the A14, and let's make this region somewhere special.
Tim, thank you. Our next panellist is John Barker, who is a Senior Development Director representing Newlands Property Development. But John, perhaps you could just help us understand that supporting logistics sector a little bit more.
Yeah, good afternoon, everybody. I'm John Barker. I'm from Newlands Developments. We're a specialist industrial logistics developer operating across the UK. I actually wanted to start by talking about an example of where advanced manufacturing and logistics is working really well together. We are the developers that were behind the successful Peterborough Gateway scheme at junction 17 of the A1M, which we worked very collaboratively with Peterborough City Council on. And I think it's a great example of where we were able to enable growth and prosperity in the region. Peterborough Gateway is home to over 4 million square feet of space, and it's a real range of occupiers because it was able to enable businesses that were local, that wanted to grow and expand, and also businesses that wanted to grow and move into the region. We've got manufacturing companies such as E-Leather and Coloplast, which are Peterborough-based businesses. We've got food production companies such as McCormick, who manufacture mayonnaise and ketchup for the likes of McDonald's. And we've got AMT Fresh, where they're operating a contract for Tesco's for citrus fruits. And again, that sort of comes back to Peterborough and its location, very close to the raw materials for those businesses. And then we do have some logistics businesses. We've got Lidl, we've got Urban Outfitters, where it's their sort of regional distribution facilities, and that's very much born out of the fact of the strategic location with the A1M, A14 corridors. Peterborough Gateway provides over 5,500 full-time jobs, and then a further 2,500 indirect jobs. It generates over £7 million per annum in business rates, and has very much put Peterborough and Cambridgeshire on the map from an I&L perspective. I'm sure we'll touch on it a bit later on in the debate, but why was it so successful? I think it sort of comes down to three things, really. Labour supply, availability and access to critical utilities, and again, the strategic location of where Peterborough and the wider Cambridge region is. Thank you.
John, thank you. And thank you very much for pulling out two very palpable examples that our audience have probably consumed or sat on at some point in their lives. So thank you. And our last panellist is Mike Gildersleeves, who is the Corporate Director representing Huntingdon District Council. So Mike, why is manufacturing in our region so important to you and your colleagues?
Yeah, thank you, Charlotte. So really pleased to be here today. In my portfolio of place-based services, I've got economic development, regeneration, but I've also got planning. And that normally gets a boo at this point in any kind of any of these sorts of proceedings. Before we start, I am going to talk about Huntingdonshire generally as a place, and just use a couple of lines from our economic growth strategy refresher we're just doing. A rich economic history, an economy of transition from brick making in Yaxley and light engineering in market towns to now more advanced opportunities, advanced tech such as graphene at Paragraph and modern agri-tech at M&M Flowers at Alconbury Weald Enterprise Zone. There's over 11,000 manufacturing jobs in our patch, with significant growth in defence and life science sectors. Overall, we have an adaptable economy geared to look at opportunities and not barriers. So I think that, for me, sums up really the role that we can play fitting across the topic that we've got in front of us today.
Mike, thank you, and very poetically put, so thank you. Katy, I wonder if I might turn to you firstly. You started to touch on the importance of the sector, but could you just help our audience today really put their hands around the current opportunity and where you think the future lies for Cambridgeshire and Peterborough's advanced manufacturing sector?
With pleasure. I could talk about manufacturing for hours, as Charlotte knows, so just give me an air horn after a couple of minutes. But in terms of the stats, joking aside, advanced manufacturing materials contributes an incredible amount to our region, a region that's often looked at from the angle of Cambridge dominance and life science focus. But when you look at employment, 20% of jobs in the region are involved in the sector, which is a huge proportion. In terms of GVA contribution, it's estimated to be around 25.5 billion. And again, another surprising fact for Cambridgeshire and Peterborough is that it has the greatest breadth of manufacturing subsector in the country. So Norfolk, Suffolk, very similar, but it isn't an area that is dominated by a single sector. So we're not reliant on a Jaguar Land Rover, on the motor industry, on aerospace and defence. It has got a really broad range of manufacturers, a bit like mine, who are part of complex onward supply chains, contributing those kind of core services and those specialist skills to deal with UK supply chain. So in terms of that subsector strength, electronics is the highest concentration in the region, which again is a real surprise for people, even within that manufacturing kind of world. But we have a really strong capability of kind of highly skilled general manufacturers that can propel the rest of the region. And I think for me the really important part of that is that Cambridgeshire and Peterborough is a really quite diverse region in terms of its geography, in terms of its socio-economic situation. A lot of those manufacturers are in areas, or could be in areas, where it could really promote inclusive economic growth. So we've got a high concentration of manufacturers in Peterborough. It's an area that could really do with kind of that economic boost, as we just heard from John around the Peterborough Gateway. Manufacturing has that incredible capability through its wide access routes and its kind of breadth of roles involved to make sure that we can include all of our people in the region in good economic growth.
Tim, you started to reflect on what always feels like the obvious strength. We've got Cambridge, the number one science and technology superpower by density globally, number one in the world. But how does that intensity of R&D then play out as a benefit for the wider region and supporting the growth of advanced manufacturing moving forwards?
I think Cambridge is an absolute jewel. And what we've seen is a number of companies spin out from Cambridge. At the symposium we had in February, companies like Ekion, who were spun out from the university, the chemistry department, putting niobium chemistry into lithium batteries to make them speed up faster. Niobolt can speed up a battery now to charge it in a minute. So Cambridge University, and as indeed Mike mentioned Paragraph, they were spin-outs from Cambridge. So we've got that base at the smaller end of the spectrum, but we've also got to not forget the manufacturers at scale. And you look at Perkins, Caterpillar Perkins, just up the road in Peterborough. They are also rolling out their powertrain, their Nibu powertrain. Let's grab both the benefits of Cambridge and the university spin-outs, but also the scale of the businesses that are in the region. So the clean energy opportunity, which I'm very happy to touch on more, is the big one for me.
Mike, again, just building and providing context for colleagues who perhaps haven't got a perception of the wider region, and particularly places like Huntingdonshire. Why is Huntingdonshire and the wider region such a strong landing pad with great assets and attributes that make it a very good place to invest and support our manufacturing sector?
I mean, the simple answer is we're just awesome. For me, it's all about the combination of factors, really. As a great place that is there, we are very well connected with the A1, the A14, East Coast Main Line. We've got East West Rail coming on down the track as well. But I think the positioning of Huntingdonshire in particular, Cambridge, that core anchor, as you've said, globally, that global anchor to the science and technology cluster, that's bridging that gap between Ox-Cambridge Arc, however you want to describe it, the top of the UK innovation corridor, but then moving up to Peterborough, second fastest growing city in the country, that real ambition at the top end of our district, and Huntingdonshire is perfectly placed in between the two. And I think for me, the key bit for that is our values are different to those around Cambridge. So if people want to start their business, research, they can then move out and scale up in a viable and economically efficient way in our patch. But equally, we've got the quality of life that people want. We've got affordable properties, lovely market towns, thriving areas with nice green and blue infrastructure. So actually, it's a great place for people to have their staff live, their senior executives, all different walks of life. And I think the final thing for me that was really interesting in the evidence work that we've done around our economic growth strategy more recently is that history of the adaptability of our workforce in Huntingdonshire as a patch. That actually, coming back to Katie's point, we're not singular fixed on a particular industry or a particular sector. People's skills are interchangeable, and can work across multiple sectors. And that is a history that we need to continue to build on and demonstrate is a really good ambition for young people in our patch. So there's a range of different factors there, but they all come back to one thing for me, which is about the quality of the place, as well as all those additional things around accessibility that Tim touched on with his map.
And probably no wonder, therefore, that we see places like Peterborough have got 50% increased density of manufacturers versus the national average. It just shows that connectivity across the region. But John, help me bust some myths. Logistics, of course, the enabler, because if we're going to make things in Cambridgeshire and Peterborough and sell them to the world, we need to be able to move those goods. Big sheds, 0 hours contracts, low paid, low skilled. Help me unpack the reality of what modern logistics looks like.
Yeah, thank you, Charlotte. I mean, I think, as an industry, it's something that we're trying very hard to dispel those myths. The I&L sector doesn't employ limited number of people on 0 hours contracts or minimum wage. That's just simply not the case. There are such a broad range of opportunities within that sector. To give you some stats, there are currently 3.8 million people employed in the I&L sector across the UK. And it's a growth sector. We've seen that with the growth of e-commerce, our changing habits in terms of online shopping, the effects of Brexit and the pandemic with onshoring, reshoring. You've got the emergence of dark stores, production kitchens. Again, particularly in this region, given its proximity to the sort of east of Anglia and the Fens, and of course the life sciences, which is very poignant here in terms of Cambridge and the growth of that sector. But it needs to be supported by the logistics sector. And we now see I&L development as critical infrastructure. And for every new home, it's now calculated that we need 109 square feet of logistics space. So if you take the example here in the combined authority, 150,000 new homes, that equates to 17 million square feet of logistics space that should be required. A couple more stats. I&L jobs sort of typically pay £4,000 per annum more than the average of the other sectors. 2/3 of logistics managers don't have a university degree. 20% of people in the sector were previously unemployed. One of the questions I get asked a lot is about automation. And yes, whilst there is more automation in these buildings, it's not replacing jobs, but it's just changing the profile of those jobs. And we see across the buildings that we've got, there's engineering, finance, sustainability, IT, marketing, human resources. One thing that's often missed is that quite often now these businesses, whether it be manufacturers or logistics, are putting all those operations under one roof. The office element alone, can be tens of thousands of square feet. So, it really is a great opportunity for the region.
Mike, do you want to build on John's points there?
Yeah, if I may, Charlotte. We often get challenged as officers sometimes by our members around, we don't want big boxes. They are very much more than big boxes. As John's alluded to, the skills element, the career pathways for anybody and everybody in logistics. Worked in a previous life with a company called Freshlink. They were struggling for drivers. They set up their own driver training academy on site and were taking the DVLA assessors to actually assess people so that they could get people through so that they could make their business continue to work. From a local authority perspective, they're massive revenue generators. The business rates are huge. That business rates investment can then be used to do other things for our places, for our people. So again, we can't lose sight of that. I'd always say that big is sometimes better because you do create anchors at scale. Actually having those big core logistics industries and setups, they do attract other things. They do attract more people around it. You get that clustering effect that comes along, and you've got that certainty of a workforce. And I think if I use Bufferload as an example from our patch more recently, they've recently just won a new contract with the co-op just purely because of their use of sustainable fuels for their lorries moving forward. So because of that, they're actively innovating in that space. Our logistics companies are having to do this stuff. Government saying we're going to have to go net zero by whatever target. Actually, it's the retailers who are pushing the logistics as part of that wider supply chain. These guys are working on finite margins. They have to adapt. So actually, I'd say that some of the biggest innovators out there are from the big box operators ultimately.
Thank you both. Now, I'll come to our audience just to make sure we don't chop off your opportunity to ask questions short. But have we got any immediate questions from the opening remarks from colleagues on the panel? No, not currently. Okay. So, Katy, perhaps you could just build on the points that Mike started to explore in his earlier remarks regarding particularly places like Huntingdonshire, a really adaptable workforce. I think John started to pull out some of the threads as to how the two sectors together come forwards to deliver not just GVA, but also career prospects and opportunities for local people. What does that feel like to you? Because you did reference inclusive growth as something that's very important to the sector. Yeah,
absolutely. I think, as with the whole of the UK, particularly manufacturing sector, has a bit of a gap in terms of its perception with young people and kind of future talent pools, but that's no different to everywhere else. But we're doing a lot of work around Huntingdonshire to really integrate that manufacturing presence with our local schools, with our local young people, to make sure that they are aware of what goes on in those big mysterious boxes that are on the edges of their towns. as I mentioned, I think my passion for manufacturing is that there are so many different pathways and so many job roles that there really is a place for everybody in there. So we've got people in my workforce who have got special educational needs. There's a role for them. Some of my best machine operators have got Asperger's. It's a great role for them because it suits their ways of working and kind of their preferred working conditions. We've got kind of relatively modest entry routes to get people in and get people excited and captivated by the sector in a really similar way to logistics. Once they're into that world, they can then catch some inspiration. They might end up kind of having come in to just work, say, in our warehouse, moving goods around, but actually they spot the guys doing the design engineering, and that sparks a bit of kind of curiosity within them. And the next thing you know, you've got them on an apprenticeship pathway, and they're staying with you to for the long term as an apprentice. So it's an incredibly accessible sector, and logistics is not dissimilar. I've definitely come across people who have ended up in my workforce who may have started, come over to the UK, started at a relatively low entry kind of role in logistics, but actually then they got their kind of ESOL qualification, they learned English, they managed to progress, and now they're kind of up and flying and finding their calling. So I think it's a really important contributor. When we look at Huntingdonshire, I live near the town of St Neots, which is the largest town in Cambridgeshire. It's almost geographically encircled by manufacturers. It's such an important part of that local kind of economy and that local kind of geography. Same with St Ives, where my business is kind of present. So it's Cambridgeshire and Peterborough has got that fascinating proper market town kind of structure that gives you that full-on supply chain and that connected supply chain to then be able to kind of link in with the road transport, link in with Cambridge City, and be able to deliver whatever we need to for the region.
John, perhaps you could just take us through where are those sites that you think are really successful, and what's the recipe that has enabled them to be so successful? But for that future growth, when we're thinking about key pieces of infrastructure, the affordability of land, making sure that we're connecting to a workforce, what does a future site that's going to be really successful and very appealing to invest in and develop, what does that look like to you?
Something that's got planning? No, I mean, I think I sort of briefly touched on it at the start. I think there's sort of three, when we're assessing our sites, we kind of probably a starting position is to look at three key things. Location. So, these developments need to be on the strategic road network. They need to be close to existing motorway junctions, really. So I think that's probably number one. I think particularly with the manufacturing now, and to some degree with logistics buildings, they are becoming bigger. Not everyone's cup of tea, but that's the reality of the situation. So you do need these big sites that can provide big single plateaus. Undoubtedly, I think one of the biggest challenges is around utilities. It's something that probably was undoubtedly one of the big reasons we had such success at Peterborough Gateway is because we were able to secure quite a lot of power very early on in that project, and then that enabled us to do deals with some of those manufacturers that we've talked about, the likes of Coloplast and E-Leather, who are big power-hungry businesses. And if you look at the word advanced manufacturing, there's going to be more technology in these buildings, and therefore you're going to need some more power. So I think that's something that in the region, not just within Peterborough and Cambridgeshire, but nationally, it's an issue and something that needs to be addressed. And then probably the final thing is labour supply. Katie's just touched on it. Particularly in this region, yes, we all talk about life sciences and the universities and all those very highly skilled people that are in those sectors, but you also need jobs for everybody. There are certain parts of the region, unfortunately, where there are levels of unemployment, and there are people that are looking to get into those more entry-level jobs. So I think for me, they're the sort of three key things. And the great thing about this region is that it ticks most of those boxes. There is land available next to existing motorway junctions that could be brought forward through the emerging local plans. There's obviously a significant amount of housing growth that's being proposed in the region, but that will be for all types of housing, as been discussed in previous panel discussions today. So you're going to have a wide range of skills and workforce to pick from. Probably the utilities bit is the biggest challenge.
Tim, perhaps you could build on John's almost wish list and those attributes that he's seeking, and then we'll come to Mike for the difficult point about how and his team therefore then have to respond through quite a long list of things that we need to align. So, Tim, what's
I
that
think-
future site look like?
Well, I think a future site is, and I endorse totally what John's saying about large scale, big flat plateaus. Things are big, as Mike's alluded to. I mean, we've been talking to a large Dutch manufacturer, sort of e-commerce distributor and manufacturer, and they want one building of 1.2 million square feet, and then as John was saying, there's lots of offices in there as well. And what was really interesting though was actually sitting them down with Anglia Ruskin University and sitting there and saying, look, they can provide people doing commerce. They've got 800 PhD post MPhil students on their supply chain course. So there are these real skills and these nuggets of opportunity that we have in the region that are not just about advanced manufacturing. It's not just about life sciences and silicon chips. It is about these other sectors. So I think large scale sites and the ability for us to reference the universities and the skills we have in the area is really important.
And when you're sat with that Dutch investor, a really good example, what's the sell, Tim? Why should they invest? Why come to Cambridgeshire? Why invest in our region?
I think the first thing is the location. I mean, government spent 1.5 billion on the A14. It's oft talked about the A14 dividend. Let's make the most of that infrastructure. Secondly, they like the idea they're close to Stansted. East West Rail, as Mike says, it's coming down the tracks. We really hope it comes. So location is pretty important. I think that the ability for them to be close to the East Coast ports is, of course, key. And in this particular case, they were able to reduce their carbon footprint by importing goods straight into the UK, and where better else to do it than Huntingdonshire? And currently all their goods were going to the Netherlands, so they're going to reduce. And I got a report from ARU that showed that their carbon footprint will be save 75% of their carbon by having trucks coming straight off the ferries. So I think location is really important, but it is about the skills we've got in the area.
So, Mike, how then do you respond? What does that public-private partnership look like to solve what can be sometimes some difficult roads ahead?
Yeah, absolutely. It has to be done in partnership. We have to collaborate. I've heard numerous times today already in various sessions about the barriers of planning. It's a process that people have to go through. We can make it as hard or as easy as we like. The easy road is to collaborate and try and find the mutually agreeable solution, even if not everybody gets absolutely everything they want out of it. Actually, where can we find some common ground and something that we can all live with and walk away kind of shaking hands and going, yeah, we can live with that. I think the challenge for local planning authorities and councils is always this balance of what does the market tell you it wants? What are the likes of John and Tim when they're knocking on my door saying, we need X million square foot? Okay, what's the realism behind that? What's the market that's sat behind that? Where's the investable proposition that sits behind that? Versus the hypothetical calculations and the theoretical calculations that very well paid consultants will do for us on a regular basis. How do we find the common truth between those two things? And then you overlay that with speed, you overlay that with quality. From a local planning authority and from a council's perspective, I talk for Huntingdonshire and colleagues across the wider region. None of us want to get in the way of progress. Absolutely none of us. We all want to see our communities thrive. We've all got pride in our jobs. We've all got pride in our places. We want to see the best for our communities, for our residents, both now and in the future. We don't deliberately put barriers in the way just for the sake of it. It's actually just we need to find and shape and work collaboratively to get to the right solution. So one of the things we will often challenge developers is to say our members have set out their stall in terms of the place strategy, which is our vision for our area. It talks about inclusive economy, it talks about pride in place, it talks about environmental innovation and other things. So the first thing we say is, have you read our place strategy? How does your proposal tick the boxes that we want to tick? How does your scheme start to embed those aspirational opportunities for our young people? How does your scheme deliver jobs for people that are maybe having to retrain during their lifetime as we all get later into our careers? as opposed to simply, I want to build a big box, I want to build it there, and I want to build it tomorrow. Because actually, we need to work on this collaboratively to get the right solution. And if I may, I will just pick up on John's point that, you can see on the wall behind us the aspiration for our region, the collective aspiration that Team Cambridgeshire and Peterborough is bringing for our local growth plan, touching on all those sectors. All of those are underpinned by logistics in some way, shape or form, because best will in the world, you can research the best product in the world, but if you can't get it to market and you can't get it there when it needs to be, what's the point? But the challenges around utilities, the challenges around water, how do we collectively solve that challenge? Because it might be great that one site over on Peterborough Gateway has got access to a load of power, makes that really attractive, but actually if there's a greater need elsewhere in the region, but we haven't got the power, how do we collectively come together to get UK Power Networks, to get the government to invest, to get whoever we need around the table to unlock that challenge? That's where collaboration is key for me.
And Mike, what does that already look like? So you've referenced we've got a number of colleagues representing neighbouring districts and areas across the region to your own. But today, what does that collaboration feel like?
It's quite special, actually, in this region, to be fair. I've worked in a number of different locations where it doesn't have the same power that we have at the moment. Collectively, there is that shared ambition across the combined authority region. We are clued into the local growth plan. All the noise we hear is that the collective approach to the development of that local growth plan has put us far and away ahead compared to some of the other combined authorities up and down the country. That is only because we all know our individual places, but we can also equally see the various challenges that we've got on the patch. I keep looking at the back because I've got colleagues from Peterborough at the back that, we know as well as they do what their power challenge is. But equally, we know we've got sites that are just outside their border that will meet some of their economic needs. So they need to play with us and we need to play with them and get the mutual benefit for the wider region, because ultimately business doesn't care. People don't care about these arbitrary boundaries. The only people that do care about them, sorry, Dennis, politicians, government, and the people that work in local government sectors. We just need to put that to one side and say, how do we make the best things work that are going to deliver the outcomes that we need for our region?
And Mike, I think it's a really key point and strength of the region. The five of us all know each other very well. It's not been by accident today that we just come together and had to be introduced, because the region is working so collaboratively. And with Matt stood there at the back of the room, Peterborough Gateway, to your point, John, if you love industrial tourism, go to that site. It's absolutely beautiful, and what a great representation of what a modern place to work, a modern place to do business absolutely should look like. But Katy, you've had the benefit of manufacturing across a number of areas in the country. You've recently been to the Middle East, championing export. But what makes Cambridgeshire and Peterborough a unique place to manufacture? What does it feel like walking in your shoes?
What a question. What does it feel like to be a manufacturer in Cambridgeshire? I think, to build on what Mike just said, so we had a sort of sector growth workshop the other week, and actually I think you'll find also, manufacturing also underpins all of these. It's an incredible, we're talking about kind of the word powerhouse. When you combine that logistics and manufacturing piece, it underpins the delivery of all of this, which is just super exciting, and it's a really exciting place to be. When I sit and kind of talk to peers who are running companies in other parts of the country, I talk about this a lot, and I'm not on commission, but it's incredibly special to be a manufacturer in a region that actually recognises manufacturing as a key part of their economic growth strategy. A lot of parts of the country and some of the kind of government wording that we hear sometimes just doesn't like talking about manufacturing. It's not very sexy, it's not very glamorous, it feels a bit like Charles Dickens in the world of workhouses. It isn't like that, I assure you. So to actually have to be running a manufacturing company in a region that actually has it in purple as a funky little graphic on its board, pride of place at the front of the room, is incredible, and I'm really very lucky. So we did a bit of work just recently with Make UK around their kind of devolution kind of white paper, just looking at how is devolution working, how does that feel for manufacturers. They were astounded when I told them that we have a dedicated sector growth champion whose job it is to promote our sector in the region. And they were like, well, is he like a volunteer? Is it like I mean, David, you could always put that to Paul, couldn't you? But no, his role is to promote and understand and forge an economic growth strategy for our sector. That is an incredible asset that we have as a manufacturer, and I think we are incredibly fortunate, and I'm very grateful that we have that, so thank you very much. Beyond that, they're incredibly easy to work with, so I'm really blessed to be working in Huntingdonshire, and I'm not saying this just because Mike is sat kind of 4 people down, but we have an economic development team in Huntingdonshire who are incredibly good at going out and speaking to businesses and understanding what you're talking about, showing an interest, even if they're bored to tears. They're very good at looking like they're interested in our printed circuit boards, so it's much appreciated. But joking aside, they're incredibly good at listening to what is going on in that sector, understanding that, translating that into, right, what can we do to help that? How can we connect you to other people in our region? I mean, we were just having a conversation earlier about another manufacturer that we could do some work with just to sort of see how we could kind of grow together. You feel like your district and the combined authority as a whole has got your back as a manufacturer, which I would say very few of my peers benefit from elsewhere in the country. So I'm incredibly fortunate.
John?
Yeah, I mean, I think I just want to pick up on a couple of those things, Katie. I mean, I was here this morning to listen to the mayor, and I think his sort of final sentence was, "The time is now." And I think for this region, it's really important to recognise what you've already got in the region. You know, Tim's touched on it. Most of the people in here will know a number of businesses, whether that be manufacturers or logistics operators within the combined authority area. And it's really important that you keep those businesses in this area, because we are, very much aware of businesses that are now in older buildings. I mean, that's a big thing at the moment in the sector, whether that be manufacturing or logistics. A lot of these sort of 1980s, 1990s buildings are now coming to the end of their economic life. The sort of more importance around ESG and sustainability means that they need to relocate from these sites, but they need the availability of land and new opportunities to enable them to do that. And if we don't all work collaboratively and get on with it now, we will miss that opportunity, and these businesses will relocate out of the region.
Tim, we'll come to you, and then after Tim's comment, Connie will be delighted to take any questions from our audience, but Tim, over to you.
Yeah, I just sort of build on that collaboration theme, and I was refreshed as we were, John, to hear Mayor Paul Bristow this morning very much talk about the need for collaboration across, and his desire for collaboration across all the political geographies that we have in our area. And I think he did a good job of explaining how that's important. And I thought also it's interesting, having done the Clean Energy Symposium and having Coventry-based AVL in the room, where they brought over Warwick Manufacturing Group, who said, we're really happy to bring and put the UK Battery and Future Energy Development Centre in Huntingdon, because it's a great place. It's as I said earlier, you've got the university down the road, but you've also got Perkins, you've got Hethel, all that stuff. So collaboration, I think, is the key message, and I think it's really refreshing that the combined authority, Cambridgeshire Peterborough combined authority, are having this collaborative approach. So I think that's a big theme that's going to come out of UKREiiF, hopefully.
Tim, thank you.
Questions from the room now?
Yeah, any questions from our audience?
Hello. My name is Tyler Wilson. I'm a parish councillor from Leeds. You talked a little bit about how devolution in the combined authority has allowed a lot more joined up thinking between businesses, government, and especially the industries in your region. Do you have any plans? What's your agenda in terms of the English devolution bill that's going through? Because for West Yorkshire, where we are now, Tracy Brabin's getting a single funding settlement pot in 2026. Are you looking for something like that? Because it just opens up wonders. It's good for businesses, it's good for public services, and it gives people jobs, essentially. And how does that compare to a lot of your neighbours? Because you were one of the first regions in southern England to have a mayor. Does that make you a more attractive proposition for businesses?
Mike, I think that's one for you.
Yeah, I think that one is. Where's my combined authority colleagues when I need them? I think in terms of the English devolution bill, I think it does just open up some wider opportunities for this as an established combined authority already, and actually how we collectively can work to take the combined authority to that next level. Let's not beat about it. It's had its challenges. It's open out there. Everyone knows about it, but actually it's gone on a very quick, well thought through, well governed process to get out of some of the challenges it's had historically, and it's in a really good place now, and the collaboration is much better than, as I understand it, has ever been. So let's tick that box, but the bit now is how do we translate that into the next evolution with things like strategic planning frameworks coming through, greater levels of devolution on funding opportunities as a result of the comprehensive spending review, multi-year settlements that gives greater opportunities. What opportunities will the mayor have to leverage access into, bluntly, Treasury? Because, Treasury, regardless of whether they sit in the shadows or sat at the front of the table, they are calling a lot of the shots at the moment. So, actually for us, or for me sitting here as a place leader from Huntingdonshire, it's about how we engage with our county colleagues in the context of, and our district colleagues in the context of local government reform, but in terms of how we move forward with the English Devolution Bill, how we build those relationships and continue to deepen those relationships with the combined authority that then will hopefully continue that traction and that good work that's already in place. Because ultimately, what's good for one is good for the whole region. There are some brilliant success stories across our patch. I'll use one from Huntingdonshire. Has anybody ever heard of Acushnet? They're Titleists. They make golf clubs. One of the biggest brands out there. They've got their HQ in our patch. They're an international, massively growing business in a massively growing leisure pastime. Actually, how do we keep them here? How do we help enable them? How do we keep them growing? Because that's only going to benefit the profile of the whole region. So for me, it's about continuing what we've done well so far, but how do we deepen it and take it on to that next level?
From my own first-hand experience, we also see across sort of neighbouring counties there is a turn towards the Combined Authority to show that leadership, and we're fortunate enough to have the support of the Mayor and also the Chief Executive of the Combined Authority travelling to those places to say, actually, how do we grow the wider East of England or the Oxford-Cambridge economic corridor, and recognising that actually Cambridgeshire plays a central role in a number of different collaborative channels, not just one particular sub-region. So thank you for an excellent question. I think we've got a question just down here, Connie, please. Gentleman just with the striped shirt.
Thank you, Rory Brooke from Savills. Sort of linked to the last question and what's been said before, the question really on the distribution of industry and logistics growth in the region. So Cambridge, Greater Cambridgeshire, so Cambridge City and South Cambridge, has generally sort of had a bias against industry and logistics till recently. I mean, they've moved a bit, but maybe not as much as they could do, whereas places like Peterborough and Huntingdonshire are a more positive outlook for industry and logistics. So a question really for the panel is, what do you think the right way forward is on that, and do you think there should be more industry and logistics in Greater Cambridgeshire, and how does that relate to the wider region?
Fantastic question, thank you. Tim, I'm going to pass the potato to you first. Hot potato, off we go.
Yeah, it is a hot potato, but and we've pushed, as you'd expect, having been lived in Cambridgeshire for since 1990, I've seen the growth of traditional industrial companies grow and just disappear because there just hasn't been the space. We've got grant of processors have had to leave. A lot of companies who are traditional industrial and logistics-based businesses have not been able to accommodate their space. So we have pushed, and I think there has been historically that whole disconnect between the way local authorities work out their the quantum of space they should allocate. And we've made our representations in Greater Cambridgeshire, and we're pleased to be seeing that the local authority are listening, and indeed recently have increased their quantum of space to something like 3 million square feet, where they previously said 1.2. But that's definitely not enough. And John referenced the growth of if it's 150,000 houses, do we need 10 million? Is it 50 million? It is a big issue, but we're pleased to see that local authorities are now listening. But it is an issue for us in the sector that there is always a disconnect. You look back at what was delivered, but if there was all that demand from e-commerce and from advanced manufacturing, and of course in Cambridge we've lost lots of industrial estates to labs. Paddock's industrial estate it's gone to resi. So we have a desperate shortage across the region. So, but it's encouraging to hear that they're spreading that love, and other areas are able to accommodate some of that growth.
John, are the misconceptions playing a part here? Because I can think of conversations where historically parts of the county perhaps have not been so welcoming of certain types of sectors because we've perhaps not sold the story better, particularly around, I mean, Katy referenced that kind of false Dickensian view of manufacturing. You've talked about the kind of big empty sheds, and we know that those facts are not true. But what is it that's been perhaps driving some of these behaviours, and what does it look like moving forwards? Because that is absolutely, I think, a changing landscape, and there is an appetite for growth moving forwards.
Absolutely, Charlotte. I think, I referenced this earlier. I mean, from our perspective, you'd expect me to say this as an industrial logistics developer, but we do see it as critical infrastructure now. It's the backbone of everything we do, and it's and it couldn't be more important in a region like Cambridgeshire and Peterborough, given the real diversity of businesses that are there and the proposed housing growth. I think I would agree with what others have said. Our experiences over the last few years in the region have been that there is greater collaboration between all the various bodies and councils. I really hope that continues over the course of the next few years to enable the opportunity not to be missed. I don't make any for saying it again, but we're bringing forward a planning application on the outskirts of Huntingdon for 2 million square feet. We're in active discussions with over 5 million square feet of requirements that want to take that space. And that isn't just businesses looking to relocate into the area. That's also existing established businesses in the region. So they've got to take a more of a pragmatic view with this, look a little bit more holistically about how you bring forward these sites and not miss the opportunity.
And Mike, how do we perhaps use almost the supply chain of the region in terms of its infrastructure, that we've got amazing ideas coming out of innovative places such as ARU, the University of Cambridge, but how do we then support that in terms of evolution into commercial businesses that land in wider Cambridgeshire and Peterborough?
It's one way I come back to the role as councils, and as councils we are place leaders, for our respective communities. And I've heard it said many times that in some areas the only time that people have an interaction with their council is when something's gone wrong or there's a bill due. And I think that's different in our region. I genuinely do. I think there's support at both the district level, at the county level, and then at the combined authority level to put your arms round and nurture those businesses that are, spinning out from the university, to help them on their journey, whether that's grants, whether that's just general business support, some of our UK Shared Prosperity funding that we've delivered over the last couple of years, working with the combined authority to actually help those businesses grow in a sustainable way. That's how we develop our ecosystem. That is our business ecosystem. So, as I say, if it spins out from the research in Cambridge, they manufacture it on our patch, and then do you know what? Somebody needs to go big scale, and they, really move all their logistics hub up to Peterborough. That's absolutely fine. That's a great life cycle story for a business that is having a massive impact on our whole region. I think the bit that we do have to maintain the close dialogue on, though, is getting the one version of the truth, as I say, between what does the market want, both in quality and quantity, what is the evidence saying, and then actually what's the kind of true picture in between, so that we get something that is truly sustainable. Because a bit like you're talking 5 million square foot. We've got the best part of 12 million square foot of people wanting to come and talk to us whilst we're developing our local plan. And the challenge we have is how do we square that off against our housing need? Because I think from a member's perspective, they go, the win on growth, the win on economic growth is there. It's really clear. It's easy to sell the story about jobs. But if you're putting several million square foot that doubles your housing supply number, and then suddenly you've got an authority that's in tilted balance or needs to find massive loads of housing on existing settlements, that's when it becomes a challenge. So I think for me, the collective thought process amongst all of the bright minds across our region is how do we square that narrative off, that actually we are providing need that crosses boundaries where we can, we are being responsive to the market when it needs to be responsive, but at the same time we're doing it in a semi thought through way. And I think ambitions like the local growth plan that will be coming forward later in the year, like the spatial development framework for the whole of the region, will help to shape that and hopefully set the direction of travel as we move forward. But I think the fundamental bit for me is, in the interim period, we all just need to keep talking, all of us that are active in this space. And I look at Jake, we've had conversations before where if my team have written a local plan, the worst thing I want to see and the last thing I want to see is my local plan team with our barrister up against a developer with their barrister, up against another developer with their barrister, because it's not the local authority that loses out, it's the residents and the future residents of that area, just because everybody is probably trying to find that one version of the truth and get that collective win out of it. So for me, it's about that collaboration, that clear respect, and putting egos and everything to one side to actually find a solution that works for everybody.
I think that point, certainly, Mike, around local growth plan, long-term vision, consistency, so important to give confidence to the market. So thank you for pulling that point out. Do we have any last questions before? No. So Katy, in terms of the Combined Authority team, you're really, really grateful for that investment into those sector champions and the support to grow businesses in a strategic fashion. You also spend a lot of time working with, again, the really strong skills team that the Combined Authority have invested in. Perhaps can you give us a sense as to the region's skills infrastructure and where that's moving going forwards?
Yeah, thank you. In addition to running CapAir, I also have the pleasure of sitting on the business board for the Combined Authority, and through that I'm one of 2 business board reps that go and support the Skills and Employment Committee along with Charlotte. So we get to sort of help and contribute that kind of business voice with the skills team and work with the skills team around kind of what's going on. They can, tap into our brains and sort of bounce stuff. We're really fortunate that we've had kind of longer standing devolved skills funding in certain areas. So certainly for adult education, it's been devolved to the Combined Authority for the past few years, which has allowed them latitude where other parts of the region, parts of the country, who are under that national framework don't have quite the same. So for instance, going back to logistics workers wanting to do ESOL, so English as a second language, elsewhere in the country, it's if you're working and you earn effectively over minimum wage, you wouldn't be entitled to funded education in that field. Cambridgeshire and Peterborough are allowed latitude on that, so that earnings threshold is much higher. So then you can work and learn English as a second language, which will help you progress, etc., etc. So again, that kind of the foundation is there through the freedom that we've already experienced through devolution. Obviously, greater devolution coming down the line as we see that unfurl from national government. In terms of the skills team are kind of dealing with a lot at the moment. They're having to rapidly kind of absorb what's going on and respond to it. We've got an incredibly strong team, and it's really pleasing to be in those conversations about sector growth strategies and having representatives from the skills team in those conversations. So they're in there, they're understanding what the context is, they're working on that strategy, and they're able to kind of bench that against what they know is coming down the line from a skills standpoint, and also what they need to be thinking about going down the line in terms of skills. So we've got some really massive programs coming online in the Combined Authority kind of imminently. So at the moment there's been a really successful push for funded internships, so helping tackle kind of young people that are not in education, employment or training, a 6-week funded internship for those young people to experience work, and then a kind of older adult workless internship has just been relaunched again, which has been fantastic, and the success rates that we've seen, and I think I don't know what the stats are, but the conversion rate from those internships to full-time employment after have been incredibly high. So really proven success in that field. We've got a great program coming online called Connect Work, which is around supported sort of work coaching, so to help people who have been out of the workplace for kind of maybe health reasons, mental health reasons, so that kind of longer term unemployed pool, giving them that support through a work coach to get into employment. But it also extends beyond that to help support people to retain employment. So we've got somebody who's maybe struggling with their mental health, for instance, and there's a risk that they might fall out of the workplace. Actually, they've got access to that work coach to help them get through that so that they can sustain their employment. So there's a load of really powerful programs being launched locally to make sure that that employment feed is there and that we're able to access kind of all parts of the region to make sure that they can kind of safely and swiftly get into employment. In terms of skills, we've got some great funding going on. So when you look at St Neots and East Cams, there's an FE Cold Spots fund that has just gone through a tender process and is about to be awarded to help boost what has been identified as a cold spot in terms of that further education provision. And obviously, I can't sit here also as a non-exec of the Chambers without mentioning the LSIP. So we have a really strong LSIP team that sit within the Chambers of Commerce to make sure that that connection is always there in terms of what businesses are asking for, what those skills gaps look like, what those kind of areas are in the complex skills framework that need to be kind of amplified to make sure that we can actually get rapid responses from the skills team out to businesses. So that's kind of a bit of a flavour. I probably will have missed things.
No,
I'm not being shot. Okay, that's good.
No, I think it would be remiss of us to have talked about a number of points regarding infrastructure and the systems to support particularly sectors such as manufacturing and logistics without touching on skills. But Katie, something's popped back into your mind.
I have, of course, missed the Youth Guarantee Trailblazer. So Peterborough has been identified by the government for some additional funding to help kind of tackle 16 to 24-year-olds who are not in education, employment or training. So there's a fund that is being released to Peterborough and a lot of work, looking in Dennis's direction, going on to make sure that the young people in Peterborough have got access to brilliant opportunities to help them either identify some skills pathways or get straight into employment, which is really exciting. And again, another thing we should be really proud of in the region.
And I think, again, a real asset in terms of having a combined authority that we've been one of only 8 areas in the country to be able to secure that. And it's now our job and our mission and our duty to make sure that that's a success, so that the sites that Tim and John, that you're developing, actually we can grow the economy but also take local people with us. It's now our time to wrap up and come to a close. So I'm just going to come to each of our panellists for their closing remarks and the points that they hope you, our audience today, take away in terms of our support for manufacturing's growth in the region and how important logistics is as an enabling sector. So Katie, would you mind just giving us your closing remarks?
Crikey, have to wrap that up. So yeah, I think just to reinforce the point that as a manufacturer, as a person running a manufacturing company who has run manufacturing companies in neighbouring counties, to go back to the earlier great question, it's a great place to be. Again, having that recognition that your sector is part of, is one of 5 kind of economic growth drivers for the region and is specifically called out and recognised and supported to do that. You actually feel that support as a manufacturer, and I think that's an incredible draw in terms of our prospect for the region.
Yeah, I think we've got to remember Cambridge is one of the fastest growing cities in the country. Let's spread that love. Let's harness that growth and build on the benefits that we're getting out of Cambridge, but also recognise the manufacturing opportunity that we have in the regions.
Yeah, I mean, I think I sort of agree with Tim, really. I think the most important thing really is the time is now. There's a real opportunity now with the combined authority and everyone working together to really capitalise on those benefits that both manufacturing and logistics businesses can bring to a region to enable growth and prosperity.
I think for me, it's just recognising that there is a symbiotic relationship between advanced manufacturing and logistics, and we need to remember that one is needed to support the other, and it works both ways. My challenge to everybody in the room, and this is a bit of a shameless plug, over on the side is some Huntingdonshire gin and some Hotel Chocolat, both massive success stories for our region. So do your bit for logistics in our region by taking one away and go and sharing it with your friends. So yeah, shameless plug from me.
No, thank you, Mike. And I have to say, very distracting as chair when one of your panellists loads a bottle of gin and some chocolate below your nose for the hour's duration. Please, can we just have a very quick round of applause for our panel today? I genuinely hope that we've given you a sense and an essence as to why manufacturing is so important to our region. It's a place that's manufactured technology that's detected water on the moon. We're responsible for putting the M on the M&M, and we're home to the second leading sports car manufacturer in the world, second only to Porsche when I ask them. So we've got some world leading businesses. Never mind where we stand in the UK, we want to be world leading and take our neighbouring areas with us. A region that is invested in by great infrastructure infrastructure, skills, and making sure that we've got positive places to work, and enabled by a combined authority who are very much investing in key sectors, focused on growth, but working also with other stakeholders that have a role to play across the wider region. So we hope that that has been a useful session for you, and we hope that you'll be engaging with Cambridgeshire and Peterborough and looking forward to playing part in our growth for the future. So thank you, and enjoy the rest of UKREiiF.